Well, welcome to session number 3. Now again, session number 1 was on what is biblical love, and session number 2 was on what's our role in marriage as a husband and a wife. If you have not watched either of those videos, I would encourage you to stop this video and go back and watch those first, because these do build on each other. Now, if you're up to speed with us, then we're on page number 13 in our syllabus today. We're going to talk about communication and conflict. I believe one of the keys after understanding biblical love and understanding our roles in marriage, in having a successful marriage, is understanding communication and conflict. So I want to begin by kind of giving you a little bit of speech 101 thoughts here. What are some things we need to understand about communication to help us in our marriage? Well, first of all, we need to understand that there are 2 keys in communication. The first one is this: we have to keep all lines of communication open. Now, in your marriage, there are really 4 lines of communication: the husband to the wife to the husband to God, and the wife to God. And for you to succeed, all of those lines must be kept open. You begin to shut down those lines. Husbands quit talking to their wives or quit talking to God. Wives quit talking to their husbands or quit talking to God. And you're going to see your marriage begin to disintegrate. So it's very important, no matter what, you keep all lines of communication open. The second thing is this: you need to understand that there are 3 components in communication, and they're not all equal. When we think of communication, we think of our content. Those are our words, what we say. Do you realize that speech experts will tell you that your words are only 7% of your communication? 93% of your communication has nothing to do with the words you say. That's important to understand. The second thing is this. The second component is your tone. That's your voice, how you say it. Speech experts tell us that that's 38% of your communication. More than 5 times what your words are. Do you realize that? Your tone speaks more than 5 times louder than your words. That's why I can go home at the end of the day and I can say to my wife, "How was your day, honey?" And she can kind of sigh and go, "Fine." Now, her words said fine, but that's not what she communicated. And if I only listen to her words, I'm going to miss the communication. So your words are 7%, your tone is 38%, but there's even a greater part, a greater component, and that's your nonverbal. Your nonverbal is 55% of your communication. In other words, your nonverbal speaks louder than your words and your tone put together. So when my kids were little, my son could hit my daughter. And I could say to my son, "Apologize to your sister." And he could fold his arms and hunch his shoulders and grit his teeth and go, "I'm sorry." Now his words said, "I'm sorry." What he really communicated was, "Dad, I need some punishment." That's what he really communicated, because your tone speaks louder. Do you realize that your nonverbal is louder than any sound that comes out of your mouth? So what does that mean when it comes to communication? Well, it means a couple things. Number 1, it means that when I communicate, I have to make sure that my words, my tone, and my nonverbal are all saying the same thing. That's effective communication. But that also tells me how I need to listen, because effective listening means I have to listen to the words, the tone, and the nonverbal. In other words, when I'm watching TV and my wife starts to talk to me, I can't keep watching TV and listen to her. I'm not going to get it. It doesn't even help just to mute it and keep watching it. I'm not going to get it. If I'm really going to understand what my wife is saying, I have to give my undivided attention to her, to hear her words, her tone, and her nonverbal. Now, this also helps us to understand how to confront one another. Think about this. When you think about those 3 components, what would be the very worst way that you could confront your spouse? In writing. Because when I write my problem with you and give it to you, all you can see are my words. You can guess at my tone. You can't see my nonverbal at all. And chances are really good it's not going to work. One of the things that I think has hurt us today, and I think there's a lot of good to things like email, but unfortunately, we hide behind our emails in confronting each other. I have never yet confronted someone via email and had it work well, because they cannot hear my tone. They cannot see my nonverbal. So the worst way to confront each other is in writing. What's the second worst way to confront each other? Over the phone. Over the phone, I can hear your words and I can hear your tone, but I can't see your nonverbal. I'm missing 55% of your communication. So what's the best way to confront each other? It will always be in person, eyeball to eyeball, where I can see your words, your tone, and your nonverbal. Now, as you keep going down on page 13, I put what we call 5 levels of communication. Level 1 is the lowest. It grows to level 5, which is the highest. And most marriages begin at about a level 4, but here's the truth. Most marriages go backwards, not forwards. Very few marriages ever get to level number 5. Let me go through it with you. Level 1 is what we call cliche communication. What's that? That means there's no personal sharing. That's where we hide behind our safe defenses. We only share what we're expected. Most of your conversation in a day is cliche conversation. Hi, how you doing? How's the weather? Did you see the game last night? That's it. In fact, I would venture to guess that when you go to church on Sunday, most of your communication is cliche conversation. Hi, how you doing? How's the weather? That's it. You would be shocked at how many marriages are to the point in their relationship where all the communication there is simply cliche. Husband comes home from work. Hi, how was your day? Fine. When's dinner? 10 minutes. Okay, I'll wash up. And that's the extent of communication the rest of the night. That's level 1. Level number 2 is a little bit better. I call it reporting the facts. Now on this one, I share facts, but I don't give any personal feelings. So you can't get mad at me. I'm not going to give you my feelings about it. Level 1, I say, did you see the game last night? Level number 2, I say, Michigan lost. Now I'm not going to tell you if I'm glad they lost, if I'm mad they lost, if I think they got gypped. I'm not going to get any personal feelings. You can't get mad at me. I'm just reporting the facts. That's probably where most marriages are today. We come at the end of the day together, we report the facts about what happened that day, and that's the extent of communication. Now, level number 3 becomes the key one. I call it the tipping point. No one stays at level 3. Level 3 will either propel you to level 4 or will set you back to level 2. Level 3 is my ideas and judgments. Here's where I begin to share my ideas with you. Here's where I begin to share my judgments, but I'm cautious. If you begin to reject my ideas, I'm going to retreat back. So level 1, I say, did you see the game last night? Level 2, I say, Michigan lost. Now level 3, I'm going to test the waters a little bit. I'm going to say to you, I'm glad Michigan lost. Now if you reply harshly, I'm going back to level number 2. I'm not going to share my ideas or feelings with you anymore. This happens a lot with teenagers. If you have teenagers, teenagers will test the waters. Johnny may come home from school and you say, hi, Johnny, how was school? Great. And what happened today? Well, Billy got kicked out of school for drinking. So far, he's just reported the facts. But now he shares an idea. He says, and I don't think he should have got kicked out. I don't think there's anything wrong with drinking alcohol. Now, at that point, what does the average, red-blooded, God-fearing mother respond with? What? If I ever catch you. Now, what did mom just say to Johnny? She said, Johnny, you're only allowed to share your ideas if I agree with them. And if I don't agree with them, you better not share them because I'm going to blast you. What could have mom said? Mom could have said, well, Johnny, that's interesting. Tell me, why don't you think it's wrong? Now, what did mom just do there? She just said, Johnny, I want to hear more of your ideas. Now, at the end of the conversation, mom can still end with the age-old, as long as you live under my roof, you will go by my rules. But it's important that she says to Johnny, your ideas matter. And here's why. Because if mom or dad won't listen to his ideas, Johnny's going to go share them with somebody else who may give Johnny some really bad advice. This is also true in marriage. And let me give you an example. In marriage, this can be crucial because one of the needs that a wife has is communication. Wives need to communicate more than husbands do. So let's say that a wife is in a relationship where it's just a level 2. And anytime the wife shares her opinion on something, the husband blasts her. I mean, just blasts her. So what's the wife do? She says, guess what? I'm not going to share my opinion anymore with my husband. It's not worth it. But let's say that the husband goes to church, and let's say she's in the choir. And in choir practice, she sits next to a guy who's a real talker. I mean, this guy will talk to a telephone pole. And as they talk week to week at choir practice, you know what this guy does? He asks her about her opinions. Well, what do you think of that? And when she shares her opinion, he says, well, that's interesting. Tell me more. You know what happens over time? Even though there's no physical attraction, that wife begins to look forward to choir practice. You know why she looks forward to choir practice? Because the guy in the choir is meeting a need in her life that her husband is not meeting. And it ends in an attraction. That's why this is crucial. So level number 3, I'm glad Michigan lost. I wait for your response. If you get harsh, I'm reverting back to level 2. But if you keep the door open, I'm going to go to level number 4. Now, what's level number 4? My feelings and emotions. This is when real communication is beginning to happen. Now I become more vulnerable. Now I say to you this, I'm glad Michigan lost because I don't like Michigan. Now you're learning more about me than you ever did. Now we're really communicating. And if we can communicate at that level, then we have the chance to go to level number 5. What's level number 5? Level number 5 is complete communication. It's absolute openness and honesty. That's level number 5. Level number 5 involves big risk of rejection because now I don't hide anything. You see, up until now, I've been hiding something. I said, did you see the game last night? Michigan lost. I'm glad Michigan lost. I'm glad Michigan lost because I don't like Michigan, but I'm still holding something back. Level number 5, I tell you the whole truth. I don't like Michigan because I'm an Ohio State fan. Now see, here's what happens. At level number 5, though it involves great risk of rejection, I'm open and honest completely. Now folks, listen, when your marriage gets to level 5, your marriage is a healthy, strong marriage. Marriages that stay at level 2 will be marriages that will struggle. Now, the only thing more difficult than getting to level 5 is staying there. So here's what I want to do. I want to halfway down page 14, there's a section that says what creates communication. And I want to give you 5 things that will help you to get to level 5 and stay at level number 5 that come right from the Bible. Here's the first one. The first one is honesty. You cannot get to level number 5 without complete honesty. In Proverbs chapter 19 and verse number 5, it says this, a false witness will not go unpunished, and he who tells lies will never escape. Ladies and gentlemen, please hear me. It is never good, never proper, never right, never healthy to tell a lie to your mate. Never. The best marriage insurance policy you have is honesty. And sometimes in our macho world, guys, we think it's okay to lie to our wife to protect them. No, false security is no security at all. The moment I quit being honest with my wife, I have guaranteed us a level 1 or 2 relationship the rest of our life. There needs to be honesty. Notice number 2. There needs to be trust. Proverbs 25, verses 9 and 10. Look what it says. It says, if you have a problem with your neighbor, argue your case with your neighbor. Don't reveal the secret of another, or he who hears it, what? That you can't keep your mouth shut. He who hears it will reproach you. And the evil report about you, what evil report? That you can't keep your mouth shut will never pass away. Folks, listen. My mate is never going to be totally honest with me unless they know they can trust me. You see, if junior high Johnny confides into his mom, I have a crush on Sally, and Johnny's mom happens to be good friends with Sally's mom, and Johnny's mom says to Sally's mom, guess what? Johnny has a crush on your daughter, Sally. And she tells Sally, and it gets back to Johnny. Do you think Johnny's going to continue to tell his mom things? Not on your life. The same thing's true in marriage. If my wife is honest with me and then I go and tell other people and use that information against her, she's not going to be honest with me anymore. I've had to really watch this as a pastor. Because when I preach and teach, I love to tell personal stories. And I'll never forget when my son was real little. He wasn't even in school yet. And one Sunday night at church, after church, he and I were in the car together going home. Just he and I. And I could tell he was steamed. He was mad. I said, you mad at somebody? He said, yup. I said, you mad at mom? Nope. Are you mad at your sister? Nope. Are you mad at a friend? Nope. Well, who you mad at? You. I said, me? What did I do? He said, you made all those people laugh at me. Now, in my sermon that night, I told a story about a time a mouse got into our house. Now, my son was mentioning the story, but the story wasn't even about him. But it was a hysterical story, and everyone was busting the gut laughing. And all my little 4-year-old son knew was, Daddy told a story about me and made everyone laugh at me. And I had to pull the car over, and I had to apologize to my son. And that's when I had to make a decision that I would never tell a personal story about my family when I preach or teach unless I get their permission first. Why? Because if my wife and kids are always concerned that anything they tell me could end up in a sermon on Sunday morning, they're going to quit talking to me. To get to level 5 and stay at level number 5, there needs to be honesty and there needs to be trust. Now there's another one. There also needs to be patience. Proverbs chapter 14, verse number 29 says this. He who is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who is quick-tempered exalts foolishness. You know what happens when you're level number 5? And your mate's being totally honest with you? Your mate are going to say things to you you don't agree with. It's going to happen. When you're honest, it's going to happen. Now, when my mate says something to me in a conversation I don't agree with, if my response is, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, does that make her want to tell me more of her thoughts? No. That's going to take her back to level 4, and then level 2, and then level 1. It's important that I don't react, but instead I respond. I have to develop patience. And then, the next one, number 4. There has to be complete acceptance. We're going to talk about that next week, so I'm going to hold off on that one. And then the last one, number 5, forgiveness. Remember in week number 1 when we talked about what's biblical love, we defined forgiveness? We said forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to bring it back up, to use it as a weapon against you, even though I feel like it. Well, guess what? What happens is when we're being really honest with each other, sometimes we're going to say things that hurt. It'll happen. And I've got to choose to say, I'm never going to use my mate's words against me. I'm never going to use those words against them as a weapon. So there needs to be honesty, trust, patience, acceptance, and forgiveness. And when we concentrate on those 5 things, we can take our marriage relationship to a level 5, and even more, we can stay there. Now, with that in mind, I want you to turn over to page number 15. And I want to spend the last part of our session together talking about how to handle differences, conflict. Do you realize that most conflict that happens in your life stems from a difference you have? There are many types of differences. At the top of your notebook on page 15, I list 5 of them. First, you have differences in taste. What you like versus what you don't like. Taste in food, for example. Give you an example. My favorite sandwich in all the world, ready? Liverwurst with Swiss cheese and Miracle Whip. Best sandwich, the cameraman just fell off the seat. Best sandwich in the world. My wife can't stand to look at it, to smell it, to see it. We have differences in taste. Differences in habits. Do you squeeze the toothpaste from the bottom or the middle? My wife and I have a difference when it comes to sleeping. We can be in the Sahara Desert. My wife has to start at night with 3 blankets on. I could be in an igloo. I start at night with no blankets on. We have a difference in habits. We have difference in values, what we think are important. I'm going to come back to that because that one in my marriage created the most conflict. You'll see why in a minute. We have a difference in how we think, how we mentally solve problems. I'm the type of person, I do everything out loud. So when I'm in my office and I'm studying, I'm talking out loud. Even if I'm the only one in there, you will hear wonderful conversation coming from my office. I like to say it's because I need expert advice, so I talk to myself. But I do everything out loud. My wife, when she studies, has to have complete silence. God forbid a cricket get in the room. It's going to be a mess. So we have differences in thinking. We also have differences in temperament. And we're going to talk about that next week, so I'll hold off on that. Now, something that would be good for you to do, and it's in the middle section of page 15, is to take time as a couple to sit down and list your differences. What differences do you have in taste, in habits, in values, in thinking? Because this is important to handling conflict. At the bottom of page 15, we talk about this. We talk about how to handle differences. And I want to walk through these 5 things. I want to give you 2 illustrations from my marriage. Because when I think about the early years of my marriage, there were 2 things that caused the most fights between my wife and I. Now, in 30 years of marriage, I can only think of a couple times when we had one of those really bad knockout, drag-out fights, but they were over these issues, all right? Issue number 1 dealt with a value when it came both of them really dealt with values, what we saw as important. And one of them was minor, one of them was major. Let me give you the minor one first. My wife grew up in southern Colorado. She's a big Denver Broncos football fan. I grew up in Northeast Ohio. I'm a big Cleveland Browns football fan, which is not a good thing today, but at one time was a very exciting prospect. Now, the year we were engaged and the first year of our marriage, the Browns played the Broncos in the AFC Championship game, and both years, the Browns had the game won. But through some miracle, the Broncos pulled it off through the first year of the drive and the second year of the fumble. As a result, I loathe the Denver Broncos. And my wife feels the same way about the Cleveland Browns. Now, when we first got married, that was a struggle. I'll come back to it. Here's the second one. The second one dealt with Christmas. I grew up just my mom, my dad, my sister, and me. We didn't live near any family. Christmas was always the 4 of us in our home by ourselves. My wife grew up with the entire clan right there in town. So when it was Christmas, there'd be 200 people in the house. I'm telling you, homeless people could come in and eat. No one would notice. All the people are there. To her, that's Christmas. Now, these produce some real problems in our life. Because about every October, my wife's mom would call, "Are you coming home for Christmas?" My wife would want to go home for Christmas. I would want it just to be us. We had conflict. Now, how do you handle it? Look at these 5 steps. Number 1, there needs to be awareness. You need to be aware of your differences. Now, my wife and I knew when we got married, we had a difference in football teams. We had no clue we had a difference when it came to Christmas. That one blindsided us. Folks, listen, when things blindside you, you always get more emotional. The more you know your differences before you get married, the more likely you can keep those differences from causing conflict in your life. Number 1, be aware. Number 2, don't just be aware, acknowledge it. Acknowledge it. My wife and I wouldn't acknowledge it. In our mind, this is not a simple difference in what we think. This is a right or wrong issue. In my mind, how could she not want to spend Christmas with just us? In her mind, how could he not want to spend Christmas with his whole family? What kind of monster did I marry? You have to come to the point that you're not just aware of it, you're willing to acknowledge it. We have a difference, and that's okay. And that leads to the 3rd step, acceptance. You have to accept the difference as it is. I had to come to a point where I would say, My wife would rather spend Christmas with the entire family than just me and the kids, and that's okay. That doesn't make her a bad wife. And my wife had to come to the point that she could say, my husband would rather spend Christmas with just me and the kids and not the extended family, and that's okay. That doesn't mean he hates his family. There has to be acceptance. And then 4, and this becomes the key one, the real key one, adaptation. In other words, you have to adapt to your differences. Compromise is a horrible word in your walk with the Lord, but it's a wonderful word when it comes to your marriage relationship. In both cases, my wife and I had to adapt. Now here's what we did. When it came to football, we chose not to watch the game when the Broncos played the Browns. We just pretend it wasn't happening. That's how we dealt with it. How about the Christmas issue? Well, we came to this conclusion. We said, here's what we're going to do. What we're going to do is this year, we're going to go to Colorado and spend Christmas with my wife's family. Next year, we'll stay home just us. Now, if we're going to go to Colorado one year, we better go to my family's one year. We'll have a civil war. So the third year, we'll go to my family's for Christmas. The fourth year, we'll stay home just us. We came to that decision. We communicated it to our families and said, please don't push the boat. This is what we're going to do. We adapted. Now, here's the beautiful thing about it. The first 6 years of our marriage, before we came to that decision, we fought about Christmas every year. But as soon as we got to the point that we could adapt and we could reach a compromise, and by the way, a compromise means both people win, it's not one-sided. As soon as we reached that compromise, guess what? From that moment on, we never again fought about Christmas. Not even once, because we chose to adapt. And that led to number 5. And number 5 becomes the key one. Appreciation. When you adapt, here's what happens. You will begin to see your differences as opportunities for enrichment. It's a remarkable thing, because once I quit going to Colorado at Christmas time with a chip on my shoulder, I began to notice something I hadn't seen previously. I noticed my kids playing with their cousins. Now, I got to be honest. I have cousins, I have aunts, I have uncles that if they walked into this room right now, I would have no clue who they are. I don't have a relationship with my cousins. I don't have a relationship with my aunts and uncles. I really don't. Never spent time with them as a kid. My wife has an amazing relationship with her cousins, amazing relationship with her aunts and uncles. And I had to ask myself this question. What do I want for my kids? Do I want my kids to ultimately be like me and not even know who your aunts and uncles and cousins are? Or do I want them to have a relationship? And that's when I began to appreciate the difference. That's when I began to see that there was value in our going to Colorado for Christmas. Now, my wife will tell you the same thing. My wife will say, I love going to Colorado for Christmas, but I really love the times we get to stay home just us. You know why? Because we developed traditions that are special to just my wife, me, and our kids. And as a result, she began to see the value in what I was thinking. You see, when you begin to really adapt to your differences, what will happen is you'll begin to appreciate each other more. You'll actually grow closer together. You'll fall more in love. You'll become a better person. Conflict isn't a bad thing. If we handle it right, we can become even closer in our relationship. Whoops, just threw that off my chair. I want you to notice, if you would, on page 16. We're not going to go through it because we don't have time, but on page 16, I gave you 4 steps in resolving conflict. I hope you and your spouse or you and your fiance will take the time to read through those practical suggestions. Now, next week in our final session, session 4, we're going to talk about temperaments and acceptance. So there is on page 17 a pre-assignment. And I'd like you to do it separately from your mate, separately from your fiance, then compare answers. You're going to look at this list of items. And next to each item, you're going to put a letter L if you see it as a luxury, a letter D if it's desirable, a letter U if it's useful, a letter N if it's a necessity. Then compare your answers, see what you come up with, and next week we'll close out this online marriage seminar with one final session as we learn each other's temperaments and we learn the importance of accepting one another. We'll see you next week.